Today, I am going to continue teaching from the Practice of Lojong book by Traleg Rinpoche. I'm starting on page 90 with slogan number 12, drive all blames into one. The first point I want to make is that blame is in the plural. It's blames, not all blame. We are ordinary sentient beings. We are not exalted beings or bodhisattvas. And as a result, we follow our own selfish needs. We know we don't want to, we know we shouldn't, but we still do have ego clinging, and we frequently overpowered by the desire that ego clinging brings with it, this promise for satisfaction and happiness. And we try hard to succeed and follow what ego tells us to do. But happiness doesn't last. And frequently there isn't any happiness to begin with when we finish chasing what we think is happiness. And if you look at others, he talks about the wealthy, the powerful, the famous, and so forth, that there are a lot of stories about them. To put it in the common language, they crash and burn. And even some of them end up in prison. So there's just the nature of samsara is dissatisfaction, unhappiness. I have to add this. There are a lot of wealthy men with supermodel wives that are still unhappy. And what ego does is say, if it's not working, it is because we haven't done enough of it. So we need to do more. And of course, it's all self-deception. So this slogan is the remedy, that we're to drive all blames into our ego, not into our ultimate nature, our unborn awareness. It is into our ego, this fabricated entity that is an illusion. It has no reality. This is not about being responsible for everything that goes wrong in the world. It is blaming our ego for our misery and our suffering. In order to do this properly, we have to understand that it's possible to think independently of our ego, that we don't have to let ego control us 100% of the time. This fabricated self is made up of parts and pieces. It is an illusion. It has no ultimate reality. And this is what we are blaming. We're not blaming our ultimate nature. And Lojong is about transforming and transcending ego. So this is a technique to transform and transcend our ego. He has a number of quotes throughout the book. Some of them I'm going to quote. Some of them I will just run by. But here he has this quote by Dharma Rakshita. Since that is the way it is, I seize the enemy. I seize the thief who ambushed and deceived me, the hypocrite who deceived me disguised as myself. It is ego clinging without a doubt. Next, he goes on to talk about two mistaken views that prevent us from transforming ego. One is thinking that, well, it's useless to try to change. This is who I am. I can't do anything about it. It's this idea of solidity. Instead of ego being made up of pieces and parts, it's just a solid like a rock, and it just can't change. I am what I am and cannot do anything about it. The other is that I'm beyond help, that I am such a particularly bad person that there really is not much that can be done for me. And that's a form of laziness, actually, thinking that, oh, there's nothing I can do, so why try? So both of these, of course, are mistaken approaches. What we need to do is when something negative happens, examine it, and see if you are misunderstanding due to your projections what's actually going on. Look deeper below the surface. So instead of blaming others, think maybe I had something to do with it, with my ego clinging. And the teachings are, of course, that it is our ego that is the source of our misery. It's not other people, that it's our failure to manage, to educate ourselves, to transform our moods and our emotions instead of buying into them and having them decide what our reactions will be. So praise and blame are worldly concerns, and this is primarily focused on blame. And he, especially in this book, in the beginning, in the introduction and throughout it, talks about the victim mentality as being an epidemic today. And I would have to agree with that. I don't know if he uses the word epidemic. I'm using the word epidemic. It seems like so many people feel that they are the victim of other people. The problem with that is that you feel powerless, you feel helpless, you have a lot of anger, you stew in your anger. You wish you could change the world, but you can't. You might try to change the world, but ultimately you can't. And actually, it's much easier to change our mind. And that's what these Lojong slogans are all about, is changing our mind. It's much easier. He quotes Shantideva, and I'll read it. To cover the earth with sheets of hide would be, where could such amounts of skin be found? But simply wrap some leather around your feet, and it's as if the whole earth had been covered. So it's much easier to work with our own mind rather than change everybody else's mind, change the system, and so forth. And what this means is that we need to be careful of who we associate with. Pay attention to how you feel when you are with other people or other groups. Use some common sense and wisdom. If you are a bodhisattva, you will be able to uplift negative people, or at least not be affected negatively by them. But since we are ordinary beings, we have to be careful who we associate with. And it is important to pay attention how you feel when you're with a group of people or a certain person. And if this brings you down, then it is best for you to avoid that group or that person. He brings in this myth of two mountains, a gold mountain and a poisonous mountain, to make this point. And the idea is that a gold mountain turns the surrounding area to gold, and a poisonous mountain turns the area around it to poison. So that is the point of that myth. He then quotes from the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. When you keep with their company, your three poisons increase, your activities of hearing, thinking, and meditation decline, and they make you lose your love and compassion. Give up bad friends. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So it all comes down to ego clinging. Ego reacts, and reacts is a very accurate word, thinking this is for me or this is against me. I like this, I don't like that. There's no room for happiness in these negative states of mind that ego generates, and it causes increased suffering. It causes you to hold on more to suffering and the causes of suffering. So what we need to do is critically analyze things to keep us from becoming lost in a world of make-believe. He says, in this world of make-believe has very little correspondence with reality. And this is so appropriate today. They talk about alternate realities, and all kinds of other things, that there's a lot of what I will term separate realities out there. People have very, very different ideas of what is reality, what's going on. There are forces and people pulling the strings behind the scenes, and on and on and on. The point is that we don't vote on reality, and other people don't vote on reality. Just because a lot of people agree with a particular alternate reality doesn't make it any more real if only one person believes it. So we have to be very careful of how we project our views on reality too. It's much easier to see it in other people and more difficult to see it in ourselves. So here is a quote by Shantideva: "All the harm with which this world is rife, all fear and suffering that there is, clinging to the I has caused it. What am I to do with this great demon?" So what is a demon? Simply, it's something harmful. It's self-obsession, and there are 4 maras that are talked about in Buddhism, and they could be called 4 demons. The 4 are the celestial child, the klesha mara, the skanda mara, and the fear of death mara. Here he's talking about the klesha mara. This is our negative emotions, our conflicting emotions, and these cause us to do all kinds of negative actions, actions that harm ourselves and actions that harm others. The point is, again, with driving all blames into one, is blame the poison, blame the klesha, blame the conflicting emotion, not the person. The Karmapa has made the analogy of, if you're getting beaten by a stick, it's the hand that holds the stick, that controls the stick, that's beating you, not the stick. So if a person is causing you harm or doing things that upset you and make you mad and so forth, it's not the person, it is the klesha that is controlling the person, that is making them mad, making them afraid, making them behave in this very negative way. So if we can understand this, that it is not the person, but it is the klesha that is controlling them, this gives us a little different perspective. You might say, give the other person somewhat of a break. We can be less reactive. We can stop thinking the worst of other people or expecting the worst from other people. We can give them a little space, give them a little slack. He then quotes Aryadeva to back up what he was just teaching, and that is, just as a physician is not upset with someone who rages while possessed by a demon, subduers see disturbing emotions as the enemy, not the person who has them. He finishes up this section by talking about some Western Buddhist authors who feel that Westerners need to build up a healthy ego first before you can tear it down. And I do not know who he is referring to. And that's typical of a good Tibetan teacher, that they will warn you about a particular type of teaching, but they won't say who's giving it. But he says, quote, "that logic is total nonsense," end quote. So we are not going to do that. The Westerners, he feels, are over-focused on their problems, their wants, their desires, control their stuff. Westerners have too much on their mind, or we have too much on our mind. Again, ego is fabricated. I saw a cartoon once. I wish I would have saved it. But the caption was something like, "Sydney has too much on his mind." And on top of his head was a pile of everything, including the kitchen sink. And I think that describes Westerners. We have so much on our mind, and we just chew on it and chew on it and regurgitate it over and over and over we go. Well, I'm going to finish up this section with a quote. We can train ourselves to harness the ego's energy on the spiritual path. In the process of doing so, we transform a problematic aspect of our lives into something transcendent and inspiring. He doesn't talk about it here. He talks about this in other places. That is the functional ego. That is an ego that is able to function within samsara, within the mundane world, but it does not view itself as unique. It views itself as a product of interdependence. The next slogan, slogan 13, is meditate on the great kindness of everyone. And I like this slogan. I think this makes so much sense. If we look at our situation, we were born because we had parents. A woman gave birth to us. If we were fortunate, our father was present and our mother was present in our childhood. Anyway, somebody kept us alive till we could take care of ourselves. We required food, housing, medical care, school. You can all speak English, you can read. You weren't born with that. It's easy to feel neglected and alone, underappreciated, and so forth. But if we look at things carefully, almost everything that we need in our present situation is touched by other people. And almost everything that we needed in the past was a result of other people. I have been writing a memoir, and I go back in there to a number of people that were really crucial in my life. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, of course, was very crucial. But before that, when I was young, there were people that showed kindness to me when I really needed kindness. And I think all of us can think about people beyond our parents, maybe a teacher, maybe a parent of a friend. In my case, my grandmother and an uncle and so forth, that all of them had quite an impact when I look back on it, on my life. There's so much in our life that is a result of other people, experiences of happiness and joy, leisure time, playing games of one sort or another, where it be a card game, a board game, a touch football game, but playing games, comfort. Here's a good one I was thinking about, and that is roads. We like to drive our car. Well, you need roads. If you've ever been over to India, you realize that roads are not a given. A road in India is a very different experience than a road in the United States. Either way, the roads were built by humans, designed by humans, paid for by humans, maintained by humans. You know, they say up here there's 2 seasons, winter and road repair, and we're about over with road repair. And then, of course, after that, then they're plowed by people. And all of this requires equipment, requires taxpayer money. It requires taxpayers to pay taxes, and on and on and on. And so just the very fact that you're driving a car involves all kinds of people in all kinds of different ways. And it's easy to not feel gratitude. Well, how come they're doing road repair? Why do I have to be slowed down here now in this traffic jam because they're doing road repair? You know, this is a very common reaction. But if we can instead feel some gratitude about this, and the same thing for electricity, phone, internet. If you're in the city water and sewer, stable government, and on and on and on. There's just a countless number of things that we can feel grateful about. It's so easy to overlook, to take for granted, and not appreciate. If we really look into this, we'll see that we are benefited in so many ways. I've used this example before. I like this one brand of roasted nuts. It's owned by Hormel, the makers of Spam, and they're in Austin, Minnesota, not Austin, Texas. And on the jar of nuts, it gives a list of countries that the nuts may come from, and they're primarily tropical countries. Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, and some others. And then the United States is listed too. So when you buy a jar of nuts, the money is distributed to these foreign countries and the workers in these foreign countries, and the workers have families and they need food, clothing, and shelter, and that is received from other people in these countries, and on and on and on. That just eating a jar of nuts or a handful of nuts, you're in touch with the kindness of people all over the world. So we need to really meditate on this. It's so easy to think that the world is working against us, that life is a struggle, that others are taking advantage of us, that life is a zero-sum game. In other words, that my happiness comes at the expense of somebody else's loss of happiness, or vice versa, that somebody else's happiness comes at my expense. And of course, it isn't like that at all. Happiness is contagious. It doesn't have limits to it. And just because another person is happy doesn't mean that you have to suffer. So contemplate this, contemplate that how many people you've never met, never will meet, have done things that you benefited from. Don't take things for granted. Avoid putting up walls and isolating yourself. As the slogan says, appreciate the kindness of others. Difficult people, on the other hand, are our best teachers. They teach us patience. A kind, generous person can't teach us patience. So a difficult person can really help us develop patience. And what comes to mind is a story that Khandro Rinpoche told at a teaching of hers. You may have heard me talk about this in the past, but I think it's worth mentioning here. It was India. It was the Tibetan New Year's time of year, and the Tibetans were trying to get to Dharamsala on a train. They were at the train station. Now, trains in India are different than trains in the United States. You have porters and other employees of the train company, and their job, as they see it, is to hassle you until you pay them. And so you had high lamas with their attendants getting hassled by these porters, and you had the lowest of the low of the Tibetans getting hassled by the porters, and things were getting chaotic. Things were getting, let's just say, getting to a boiling point. A lot of anger, yelling, and so forth. Porters were just being difficult because they weren't getting paid off. And one of the High Lamas, seeing all of this, he started doing prostrations to one of the porters, a gesture of great honor and respect to this porter that was teaching everybody patience. Once he did that, the other Tibetans caught on and things calmed down, and everybody did get on the train peacefully. So the point is that we need to work with these negative situations to become wiser and stronger. I'm going to add more mature. Here is a quote by Shantideva. So like a treasure found at home, enriching me without fatigue, all enemies are helpers in my bodhisattva work. Therefore, they should be a joy to me. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. If any of you say this is easy, I'm going to kind of go, oh, really? But they really help us. They help us become wiser, more resilient. They sharpen our intellect. And every time we work with them and able to overcome an obstacle or some adversity, we're learning. Diverse experiences are enriching. And then he comes up with one of my favorite sayings. The manure of experience becomes fertilizer for the field of the Bodhi. And Bodhi here means enlightenment or profound spiritual growth. And the idea is that manure, if it's handled properly is a fertilizer and is very, very nutritious for the growth of plants. So this figurative manure that we run into with difficult people is very, very rich with the possibility of helping us grow spiritually. So our response to the adversity is more important than the difficulty. If we can have control of our responses can become more meaningful than if they are just a knee-jerk habitual pattern, where it's more of the same old ego. So our mistakes can become more meaningful too as a result of this. We can learn from them instead of thinking, oh, there I go again, I screw up again, I'm always making mistakes. We can see our mistakes, we can see our faults, and then we can work with them and we can be motivated to improve, to change. It's interesting that sometimes we don't see our faults, but we see faults in other people. And the reason why I say it's interesting is frequently what gets us upset about other people is a fault that we have that we're really not aware of. So if somebody does something and you get upset about it, or it kind of irritates you, it's always good to look inside and examine, do I ever do that? This actually can be like a red flag to help us see some of our own negative patterns. And it's good to avoid fixating on other people and their faults, to give them some space. You have probably heard me say this. I have a list of 5 unrealistic expectations of life. And so I'm going to insert number 5 here about being fixated on the behavior of other people, which is thinking that life should be fair and I am the Supreme Court that decides what is fair. We need to keep a perspective and try to avoid going down that road of being the one that determines what is fair, what should be, what is unfair. A spiritual perspective gives people space, gives them a little room. And because of karma, nobody gets a get out of jail free card, no matter what. It might be in a future life, but at some point, a person that is behaving poorly and causing a lot of harm, they will be subject to the karmic consequences of their actions. So we don't have to punish them. They will be punished by their karma no matter what. What we do have control over is our own experience, which means how we interpret our experiences, how we deal with difficult circumstances. Do we get angry or not? Are we bitter or not? So this is what we can develop, is you could call it self-control, appreciating others, driving all blame into ourselves, our ego, that is, and developing spiritually. He finishes out this slogan with the skillful means of absolute bodhicitta. What he's talking about here is that we need, on a relative level, skillful means, which just talked about, and on the absolute level, wisdom. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed by suffering and the sadness and the pain of the relative world. We have to realize that because of absolute bodhicitta, these things are temporary, they're illusory, and that the absolute is beyond the relative. He quotes Atisha about this point: wisdom without skillful means, and skillful means too without wisdom, are referred to as bondage. Therefore, do not give up either. Here, bondage means no freedom. If you just look at wisdom, then you are missing the pain and the suffering, compassion, and so forth. But if you're just looking at the pain and suffering and compassion, it gets overwhelming because you don't see how all of this is like an illusion, like a dream. So he talks about love and compassion being saturated with detachment and equanimity. A lot of times, Tibetan teachers use the term non-attachment rather than detachment, but he, I think, explains what he means by detachment pretty clearly here. Detachment is not indifference. Equanimity doesn't mean that we don't experience any emotions either. These would be the extremes. Detachment being indifference, and equanimity meaning that we just emotionally flat. If we were relating to people with detachment only, it would be cold, it would be hollow, there would be no benefit from it. And you might say others would easily see through you. So without relating with love to people, but without equanimity, we have emotional turmoil. We have ups and downs, upheavals, feeling great about it, and then all of a sudden things are terrible. We get caught up in the drama rather than viewing the drama from a distance. So we have to learn to express love and compassion intelligently. The word that came to my mind was emotional intelligence, where you have a better feeling for the emotions that come with love and compassion, but your wisdom, your intelligence keeps you on an even keel and keeps you from getting sucked into the drama. So we have to remind ourselves that beings that we care for are the result of causes and conditions, and that their nature is emptiness. This is this absolute bodhicitta. And that is you too. Your nature is emptiness. So we need to let go. We need to experience and then let go, experience and let go, touch and go, touch and go. Yawang Karmapa, Holiness the Dalai Lama, have heard countless stories of suffering, of treatment in Chinese prisons, of people dying of disease and other causes prematurely, poverty, and on and on and on. But they let go. The compassion is there, they express it, but then they let go. They don't hold on to it. You see the Dalai Lama frequently laughing. He couldn't hold on to it and laugh later. So it's about experiencing it, but then letting it go, experiencing the suffering of other people, but letting it go. Realizing that you're not responsible for the world. You're not responsible for eliminating all the suffering in the world. You may be motivated, may I be able to liberate every sentient being from suffering, but in the meanwhile, we don't have that ability. It's an aspiration. So what we need to do is integrate this absolute and relative bodhicitta, or emptiness and compassion. And he talks about it being the middle way. And the two extremes that the middle way is between, one extreme is that we have to be rational all the time in order to counteract the emotions. And the other is that our capacity to feel emotions is most important. So the middle way is between those two. We feel the emotions, but we also have a certain rationality and wisdom and see the ultimate nature, the ultimate bodhicitta that's involved in all of this. So bodhisattva practice is about trying to love and care for all people. It is about beings that are trapped in samsara, that everybody suffers, It may not be obvious that everybody suffers. Again, it may look like some people are having a great time at the expense of other people. But again, there is no get out of jail free card, that you can't escape karma. So everybody suffers. Shantideva says, even accumulating wealth can be a problem. And he quotes him, trouble guarding what we have, the pain of losing all, see the endless hardships brought on us by wealth. Those distracted by their love of riches never have a moment's rest from the sorrow of existence. And again, I think we can look at the lives of the richest people that are in the news, and they don't necessarily have pleasant, easy lives, that there's a lot of difficulty that they face, a lot of pushback from other people. I was trying to think of a country song. Porter Wagner did it. I'll think about it after this teaching is over with. But it's a story about a man that was very wealthy, very rich, famous, so forth, and then he lost everything. But now he has a satisfied mind. Maybe that's what it's called, satisfied mind. Anyway, I digress. Finish up this teaching. Mind training is, its sole aim is to train the mind. Social activism is not part of it. He talks about this in a number of places. It's fine to get involved with social activism, but you need to have, in his words, a broader spiritual view. He says it has to be as wide as the sky, and that your actions have to be very precise to what's happening right now. Another way to put it, you have to clean up the garbage in your own mind before you try cleaning up the world's garbage, or you create more garbage.